video, what I wanted to do is actually install the Cadillac Escalade 120 mile per hour gauge cluster into the truck. Those of you guys who haven't done it before, and we can just see how easy this actually is to install. And when I say the 120 mile per hour Cadillac Escalade gauge cluster, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It is out of the, I believe they're 2000 year model Cadillac Escalade. I think they only ran this body style in maybe 99 and 2000. And what they did is they came with a white faced gauge cluster. So you've got the white numbers, you've got the white needles instead of the orange, and it goes up to 120 miles per hour instead of just the normal 110 like the trucks came with. And as you guys know, my gauge cluster, as well as many of your guys' gauge clusters, is actually outfitted with LEDs. So perfect example of how to do that is right here. So we've got all these little lights, all these little connectors are actually light bulbs. So for each individual light, such as your check engine light, your gauge cluster lights, you actually can pull these things out, and you can see I've already got it replaced with an LED, and that's exactly how you get your gauge cluster to light up as an LED cluster. Installing a gauge cluster in these trucks is actually super simple. You have to take the dash bezel off, and once you take that off, your gauge cluster is exposed. There's 4 bolts you have to take out, and then that cluster actually slides right out of your dash. Something else that you'll have to do is you're actually going to have to take off this plastic faceplate, and we're going to have to figure out how to get this odometer out so we can swap over the odometer that came in the truck. That way our mileage and everything is right. I want to keep my current mileage in there since it is actually a lot lower than 246,000. And the bad thing about these is you really have no idea what works, honestly, until you plug everything in and just kind of hope that all the little servos and everything works and all of your lights are in there the correct way, because since they are LEDs, you pretty much have a 50-50 chance of the lights coming on and actually lighting up the gauge cluster. In order to get this face off, we have 2 push tabs that we could actually push in right here, and what that's going to do is going to allow you to go ahead and remove the face off of your gauge cluster. And now we've got this taken off, we've got access to our needles, we've got access to the tripometer, the odometer, pretty much anything, as well as all your little needles and everything. This gauge cluster I got a long time ago. I've just kind of I kind of forgot about it, honestly, and I didn't put it in there. So we're gonna mess with that, and hopefully things will work out like they're supposed to. All the LEDs will be fine in there, and everything will be good to go. The good thing about this gauge cluster is, unlike the ones that come stock in the Chevys, the numbers are white, so any color that you put back there is gonna show up as that color that it's supposed to be without having the little slight green tint that these gauge clusters come with stock. I think I pay like 55 bucks for this cluster. Some people are charging somewhere around 100, 120. Just kind of depends on who you get, how many miles is on it, and the condition that the cluster is actually in. Another thing I wanted to point out to you guys, I'm not sure if you could see this on camera, but each of these lights tells you what light they go to on the dash, so that way you can actually look at these and figure out which bulbs you want to replace. All of the bigger ones are just the regular 194 LEDs, and the smaller ones I believe are like the little 76s or 74s, or I don't exactly remember, but the same ones that go in your HVAC lighting is what these guys are. Really small bulbs, kind of hard to find, but if you get online at Super Bright LEDs, you should be able to track them down and pick them up. But here's that housing for the gauge cluster. Like I said, the main light source behind the actual gauges are the 194 LEDs, which these are white, and then you have all these little bitty guys back here, which are going to be the T10 LEDs. So we're going to have several of them to swap out, about 10 of them it looks like, so that'll be a fun time. So when you're swapping out a gauge cluster, the hardest thing to do is to find bulbs that actually fit in the holes in the back of the cluster to replace the halogen bulbs with. So that's why I recommend these. These are little bitty tiny T10s, I think. T10s, like 174 or 75 or something like that. And they're really nice and small, and they pretty much compare to the size of the normal bulb, but they still have LEDs on each side. That way you're going to get a good output. So being that all these little lights are those, we should have some good illumination when it comes to these little lights in the gauge cluster. Now, as I mentioned before, the worst part about doing a gauge cluster LED swap is the fact that 194s and these little wedge-based bulbs only work one direction. So there's a very big chance that when you put your cluster in, half of your lights aren't going to come on, none of your lights are going to come on, or if you get lucky, all of your lights are going to come on, and you have a 50-50 chance really at doing it. So once you get it all swapped over, you'll want to take your gauge cluster, and I'll show you all how to do that. Take the old one out, put the new one in, make sure all those lights work just by flipping the switch and turning that on before you put everything back together. And if it doesn't work, it's just simple enough just to pull the gauge cluster out and find which LEDs you need to readjust and just pull them out, flip them around, put them back in, try it again. All of our gauge lights are LED. The only thing that I didn't do LED were these two right here. I really don't care too much about those. I just really want good illumination from pretty much everything else, the gauges, the little lights, the turn signals especially, and so that swap is done and out of the way. The check engine light was actually the only burnt out light bulb out of this whole entire set that I did. So that is done. Now all I need to do is pull the cluster out of my truck and disassemble it, remove the odometer, and replace it with the one from my truck, so I don't have that 200-something thousand miles that this new cluster has. You see I've taken out the entire dash bezel from the truck and took the speedometer out. Super simple, it's only 4 bolts. Take those out and the thing just literally pulls right out. And what I'm doing right now is turning on the lights, turning on the key, and seeing which lights come on and light up and which lights do not. So got both turn signals working, and as you see I've got 1, 2, 3 of the actual gauge cluster lights not working. So without having the face on, I'm able just to go ahead and turn the LEDs. That way we can get them working and make sure our full gauge cluster will light up. And right here is the factory gauge cluster. You just pull it out and then you're able to swap it over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out the odometer as well as probably the face, which is the actual plastic covering, because the one on my cluster is in way better shape than the one that's on this Escalade cluster as far as like scratches and stuff goes. Now when I had the key on, none of these bulbs lit up, so I'm going to assume that it's possible that they might be turned the wrong way, so I'm going to turn them around and see if they do anything, because those lights represent the ABS, they represent the seatbelt light and the park brake light, and I know the park brake light should come on because I do have the park brake on. So now what we're doing is we're swapping the odometer over. Here's the 246,000 mile odometer from the cluster that I'm putting into the truck. And all it takes is just a Torx head screwdriver, and then you slide it off of the tripometer. And we're going to do the same thing with the odometer from my truck, which is the 170,000 mile one. And we're going to swap that out. That way everything could be accurate and just like it's supposed to be. The miles will be correct on the truck. All right, 4 screws, and we've got the correct odometer out of my truck into the new 120 mile per hour Escalade cluster. We're just going to reassemble this and then test it into the truck and make sure everything works properly. So the cluster is in, everything works, the RPM gauge works, I'm sure the speedometer works. The gas gauge still doesn't work, which means it's another issue with the sending unit or a plug or something that has to do with that, so that's always good. Temperature gauge works and the battery gauge works. Oil pressure is kind of weird and jumpy, so I might swap out the little motor, the servo, for the one mine had, because that one worked better. Otherwise, all the lights seem to work and that I need. And here's the cluster set in the truck. Everything's all lit up 100%, looking pretty good. On your HVAC panel, this is what you're looking at when you pull it out. All you have to do is kind of slide it out here, and you can only do that when you've got your full dash bezel off. And you see back here we've got the same setup as we do on the gauges. You notice that 2 of my bulbs are actually out, so what you do is you just twist them out, same little T10 bulbs, replace those, put them back in, and make sure it lights up. And once you're done with that, you slide your control panel back in there and you've got fully matching LEDs. Like I said, these are white, but they appear blue for whatever reason, and it just looks good. It looks nice and clean. Good little upgrade for your truck. Everything's put back together. The gauge cluster is in here. The white needles look so much better than those orange ones, but here's what we have right now. Really nice looking cluster, bright HVAC, and everything just looks pretty good. Something I completely forgot about was the daytime running lights, and it looks like I replaced that bulb, or that bulb still works in here. And obviously I don't have daytime running lights, but we've got the LED turn signals now. And the rest of the cluster is finally fully LED. Looks like I missed the bulb for the high beam, which kind of sucks, but you know, if I need to fix it, just take it back out and fix it again. Oil pressure works, voltage works. And here we've got the speedometer working. Everything works as it should. It's kind of an OEM plus mod you could do. And I think I said earlier, you've got two different gauge clusters that you can get. You can get the 120 mile per hour one from the Denali's. I think the Denali's and the Escalades were the only two that had them. And then we've got the 130 mile per hour one that only came in police vehicles. And that's pretty much that. Like I said, the cluster was something that I've had sitting around for a long time, and I've just not done it, so I finally got that done. Definitely glad that I did. It looks a lot better with the white needles. That's my favorite part, just the white needles. And I know you can sand the orange off of the stock needles if you want to, but just the fact that I had the 120 mile per hour Escalade cluster laying around anyway, might as well put it to use, and it looks a lot better. Hopefully that helped you guys out as far as swapping the cluster, swapping the odometer. But anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've got any questions, feel free to comment down below. Shoot this video a like while you're here. Feel free to hit that subscribe button. We will see you guys in the next video.